The old pickup truck sputtered to a stop on the side of the empty Texas farm road, smoke whispering from its hood. Inside, a woman in her late 30s clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles white. In the passenger seat, a boy of about 7 stared out at the falling snow. It was Christmas Eve, and they were out of gas, out of money, and out of hope. The only light for miles came from a single farmhouse porch lamp in the distance. Sarah took her son Ben's hand. They left their few bags in the dead truck and started walking through the cold toward the light. The snow soaked their sneakers. By the time they reached the ranch gate, they were both shivering uncontrollably. The house was a large, weathered but cared-for home. She lifted a shaky hand and knocked on the heavy wooden door. The door opened. A man stood there, silhouetted by the warm light from inside. He was tall, in his 50s, with a weathered face and careful eyes. He looked at the woman and the boy, covered in snow. Before he could speak, Sarah's voice broke. "I'm sorry to bother you. Our truck broke down. We have nowhere to go." Her whisper was filled with a shame so deep it hurt to hear. The rancher, named Jacob, was a quiet man who lived alone. His first instinct was caution, but he saw the boy's blue lips and the woman's desperate attempt to look brave. He stepped back. "Come in out of the cold," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile, but his eyes were kind. The warmth of the house felt like a physical shock. He led them to the living room, where a fire crackled. He brought thick blankets and wrapped them around the shivering pair. He didn't ask questions. He went to the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of hot chocolate with marshmallows for Ben and a strong cup of coffee for Sarah. Ben sipped the chocolate, his eyes huge as he looked around the room. There was a simple Christmas tree in the corner with a few handmade ornaments. Jacob saw him looking. "My wife, Mary, loved Christmas," he said simply. "She's been gone 10 years now." There was no self-pity in the statement, just fact. Sarah finally spoke, tears mixing with the melted snow on her cheeks. "Thank you. We'll be gone first thing in the morning. I promise." Jacob looked from her exhausted face to the boy's sleepy one. "Morning soon enough," he said. "You'll take the guest room tonight." He showed them upstairs to a clean, simple room with 2 beds. It was the safest they'd felt in months. The next morning was Christmas. Sarah woke to the smell of bacon and pancakes. She found Ben already downstairs, sitting at the big kitchen table, watching Jacob cook. Jacob was showing him how to flip a pancake just right.
"Mom,
"He's making reindeer pancakes," Ben said, pointing to a pancake with raisin eyes. Sarah offered to help, but Jacob just shook his head.
sit."
"It's done." They ate the breakfast in comfortable silence. After eating, Jacob looked at Sarah. "Your truck's at the Miller's Bend?" She nodded. "I'll tow it back here with my tractor. We can see what's wrong." She started to protest about cost, but he held up a hand. "Christmas. No talk of money today." They rode in his big truck to fetch their broken-down vehicle. Ben was thrilled by the tall tractor Jacob used to tow it to the ranch barn. Sarah watched Jacob work, his hands confident and capable as he looked under the hood. "Fuel pump," he diagnosed. "I can order the part after the holiday." Back inside, Sarah insisted on doing something useful. She and Ben did the dishes. She found a box of old decorations and, with a glance for permission, she and Ben finished decorating the tree. The house, usually so quiet, was filled with the rustle of paper and Ben's happy chatter. Jacob watched from his chair, a strange feeling in his chest. That afternoon, Jacob brought out an old sled. He took Ben to a gentle hill behind the house. Sarah watched from the window as her son, who had been too quiet and too old for his age for months, laughed and shouted with joy. Jacob stood at the bottom of the hill, a steady, solid figure, catching Ben when he zoomed down. That night, they had a simple Christmas dinner. Jacob said a short grace, thanking God for new friends. After Ben fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from play, Sarah and Jacob sat by the fire. "We can't stay," she said softly, staring into the flames. "We've taken too much of your kindness." Jacob poked the fire. "The roads are iced over. County won't be out to plow for a couple days. You're not going anywhere." He said it not as a host, but as a man stating a weather fact. Then he added softer, "The boy, he's a good kid. You both are welcome here until you get on your feet." Sarah just nodded, afraid if she spoke, she would sob with relief. Over the next 2 days, a routine formed. Sarah cleaned the house with a fury, finding every nook to scrub. Ben followed Jacob like a shadow, learning to feed the chickens and collect eggs. Jacob showed him how to brush the gentle old mare, Daisy. The boy was a quick learner and hung on Jacob's every word. Jacob drove into town for supplies and the fuel pump. At the hardware store, old friend and sheriff, Grady, leaned on the counter. "Heard you have some holiday guests, Jacob." The tone was light, but the question was there. Jacob met his eye. "Family of a distant cousin. Hit some hard luck." It wasn't quite a lie, but it felt like one. He didn't like it. He returned home and fixed their truck in the barn. When it started with a healthy rumble, Sarah's face fell for just a second before she smiled. "Thank you. Now we can be out of your way." Jacob wiped his hands on a rag. "Parts on me, but the roads are still bad. Another day or two." He saw the mix of guilt and relief in her eyes. That evening, Sarah cooked a proper meal, a pot roast with vegetables. As they ate, Ben talked nonstop about the ranch. Jacob asked Sarah, "Where were you headed when the truck quit?" She went very still. "Just headed. Looking for work. I'm a certified bookkeeper." She didn't offer more. The silence stretched. Later, doing the dishes, their hands touched in the soapy water. They both pulled back as if shocked. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's okay," she whispered. They didn't look at each other. The simple contact had sent a current through the room. It was the first spark of something neither dared to name. Ben had a nightmare that night. Jacob heard his cries and Sarah's soft voice soothing him. He lay in his own bed, listening to the sounds of a family in his house. The feeling was foreign. It was a longing he thought he'd buried with his wife. It scared him more than any stampeding Herd ever had. A week passed. The roads were clear. Their truck was fixed. Yet no one talked about leaving. Sarah took over the ranch's books, which were a mess. She found invoices missing and payments overdue. She showed Jacob, and together they spent an afternoon getting things in order. He was impressed by her sharp mind. He offered to pay her for the work. She refused. "We owe you everything," she said. He insisted. "A fair wage for fair work. That's the rule here." Finally, she agreed on one condition. She'd pay nominal rent for their room. It was a compromise that allowed her to keep her pride. They shook on it, the agreement feeling more important than it was. One afternoon, a sleek, unfamiliar car came down the driveway. Sarah saw it from the upstairs window and froze. She grabbed Ben and motioned for him to be silent. She watched, heart pounding, as a man in a suit got out and knocked. Jacob answered. The man was a real estate developer, offering to buy Jacob's land. Jacob sent him away with few words. When the car was gone, Sarah came downstairs, her face pale. Jacob noticed. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a smile. "Just don't like strangers." He accepted that, but a seed of doubt was planted. Her fear had been too specific, too sharp. That night, Jacob found Ben looking at a framed map of the United States in the study. "Looking for somewhere new?" Jacob asked gently. Ben pointed to a state on the other side of the country. Mom says it's nice there. Jacob felt a strange pang. It is nice here, too, he said, more to himself than to the boy. Sarah found Jacob on the porch after Ben was asleep. We should go soon, she said, her voice tight. We're overstaying. Jacob looked out at his land, silver in the moonlight. The ranch is big. There's room. Ben's happy. You're a help. He paused. I'm happy too. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. She didn't reply, just slipped her hand into his for a brief, breathtaking moment, then went inside. A cold snap hit. The pipes in the ranch house's guest bathroom froze and burst. Water poured into the room below. It was chaos. Jacob and Sarah worked together for hours, mopping, shutting off water, and salvaging what they could. They were soaked and exhausted, but they laughed at the absurdity of it. The guest room was unusable. You and Ben will have to take my room, Jacob said. I'll sleep on the couch. Sarah protested, but he was firm. That night, as she lay in his bed, surrounded by the scent of him, soap, leather, and earth, she felt a profound sense of safety. Ben slept soundly beside her. Days turned into repairing the damage. They worked side by side, their partnership easy and natural. He held the pipes, she applied the tape. Their shoulders brushed. Their eyes met and held. The slow burn between them was now a steady flame, warming every interaction. They never spoke of it. Jacob went to the post office. In his box, among the bills, was a photocopied flyer. It had a grainy picture of a woman and a boy. The words read, "Have you seen this woman and child? Possible custody dispute. May be in danger." A phone number for a private investigator was listed. It was Sarah and Ben. He stared at it, his blood running cold. Custody dispute. Danger. He thought of her fear of strangers, their sudden appearance, her reluctance to talk. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He drove home, his mind racing. Who was she running from? The boy's father? Something worse? He didn't confront her. He watched her that evening, reading to Ben on the couch. She was gentle, loving. Whatever the story was, he knew in his gut she was protecting that boy. The flyer said possible custody dispute. That meant it wasn't clear-cut. He made a decision. He would not drive her away. He would be her shelter until she told him the truth. He threw the flyer into the wood stove and watched it burn. He was committing himself to their secret. He was now part of it. A man came to town asking questions. He was polite, well-dressed, and said he was looking for his sister and nephew. He showed the same grainy photo at the diner. Sheriff Grady heard about it and, remembering Jacob's distant cousin, drove out to the ranch. Jacob was working on a fence near the road when Grady pulled up. The sheriff got out, his face serious. "Jacob, we need to talk. A man's in town looking for a woman and boy that match your guests." Jacob kept nailing a post, his face unreadable. "That's so." Grady leaned on the fence. "I'm not here to stir trouble. But if they're here, and this is a family matter, it could get complicated. The man says the woman's unstable, took the boy from a safe home." Jacob stopped hammering and looked Grady dead in the eye. "I've seen that woman for near a month now. She's the most stable, capable person I know. And that boy is happy and healthy. What does that tell you?" Grady held his gaze, then nodded slowly. "It tells me maybe the man in town is selling a story. But he has legal-looking papers, Jacob. He could get the state police involved." Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. "How long do I have?" Grady sighed. "I'll slow him down. Maybe a few days. But you need to talk to your guests, Jacob. Get the real story." Jacob found Sarah in the barn. He didn't mince words. "A man's in town, looking for you and Ben. Says you're unstable. that you took Ben from a safe home." Sarah's face went as white as the snow outside. All the color, all the life, drained from her. She sank onto a bale of hay. The truth was finally here. She told him everything. Her husband, Ben's father, wasn't just cruel. He was connected. He had money and friends in low places. He didn't want Ben for love. He wanted him for control and to stop her from testifying about his shady business deals. The custody fight was a sham to get them back under his thumb. She had run with nothing to keep Ben safe. The law was on his side because of his money and lies, she said, tears of fury and fear in her eyes. "So I left the law behind. I became a ghost. Until our truck died on your road." She looked at Jacob, terrified he would tell them to leave now that he knew the danger. "I understand if you want us to go." Jacob crouched in front of her. "Look at me. You are not going anywhere. That man sets one foot on my land. He'll regret it. This is your home now." It was a vow. The romance, the gentle feelings, were suddenly secondary. This was about protection, about family. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly as she cried. Jacob put a plan into action. He moved Sarah and Ben into the more secluded line cabin, a small but sturdy cabin used during cattle drives, deep on the ranch property. He told his most trusted hand, an older man named Walter, the truth. Walter agreed to keep watch and say he was fixing the place up if anyone asked. Jacob then drove to the nearby city. He didn't go to the police. He went to a private security firm run by a former Special Forces man he'd once helped. He showed him the copy of the flyer he'd kept. "I need to know everything about this man," Jacob said. "And I need a way to make him go away for good legally." Back at the ranch, life took on a tense calm. Ben knew something was wrong but felt safe with Jacob and Walter around. Sarah's love for Jacob, born from kindness, was now fused with a desperate, grateful devotion. His love for her was now fiercely protective. Their touches were fewer but carried the weight of their shared secret. Jacob got a call from his friend. The news was a twist he never saw coming. "Your man, the husband," the friend said.
"He's not who he says he is."
"The name he's using? It's an alias. His real name is on a watch list for fraud and conspiracy. The feds want him, but he's slippery. His custody play is probably a way to access hidden funds in your lady's name." Jacob drove home fast. This changed everything. Sarah wasn't just running from a bad husband. She was running from a criminal who needed her to stay hidden. The legal papers were a weapon, but the man himself was vulnerable. He told Sarah everything. A new hope lit her eyes. "If the authorities want him, maybe we can stop running. Maybe we can fight back." Jacob nodded. "We set a trap, but we use his own game. We let him think he's won." The plan was simple and dangerous. Sarah would call a lawyer in the city, a friend of Jacob's security contact. She would state her location, saying she was ready to discuss custody, drawing the husband out. But the meeting would be on Jacob's terms, on his land, with evidence of the husband's real identity ready to go to the FBI. That night, as they prepared, Sarah took Jacob's face in her hands. "If this goes wrong," he stopped her. "It won't. This is my land, my home. You're my family." He didn't say, "I love you," but she heard it. She kissed him then, a soft, sure kiss that sealed their partnership. The battle lines were drawn. The final showdown was coming. The plan was set. Sarah made the call from a secure phone Jacob provided. Her voice trembled only slightly as she spoke to the lawyer, stating she was at the Riggs Ranch and wanted to settle the custody matter, once and for all. She hung up and looked at Jacob, her face pale but determined. "The bait is set," she said. Jacob's security contact, a man named Miles, arrived at the ranch. He was ex-military, quiet and observant. He swept the main house and the line cabin for any signs of surveillance. He set up small, hidden cameras at the ranch's entrance and on the porch. "We want to see him coming," Miles explained to Ben, making it sound like a game. Ben nodded seriously. The next 2 days were a lesson in waiting. Every distant car engine made Sarah jump. Ben stayed close to the house, his usual cheerful energy dampened by the tension. Jacob kept up the ranch routines, but his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. The slow burn between him and Sarah was put on hold, replaced by a shared, focused mission. Miles brought news. The husband, using the alias David Miller, had taken the bait. He'd hired a local lawyer and filed an emergency motion with the county court, claiming Sarah was hiding on an isolated property. A hearing was set for 3 days away. "He's moving fast because he's scared you'll disappear again," Miles said.
Good.
Scared people make mistakes. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She found Jacob on the porch, keeping watch. She stood beside him, their arms not touching but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "I keep thinking I've brought a storm to your quiet life," she whispered. Jacob didn't look at her. This wasn't a quiet life. It was an empty one. "You didn't bring a storm. You brought a reason to stand in the rain." The next morning, an official-looking envelope was delivered to the ranch gate. It was a court summons. Jacob brought it to Sarah. This was it. The legal fight was now real and imminent. They would have to go to town, to the courthouse. They would have to face him. Sarah opened the summons, her hands steady. She read it, then looked up at Jacob and Miles. "He's playing his legal card. He thinks this will force me out into the open on his terms." Jacob took the paper. "Then we change the terms. We don't run. We walk right in, with our own ace in the hole." He looked at Miles, who gave a slow, confident nod. The day before the hearing, Miles delivered the ace. It was a dossier on David Miller, whose real name was David Kalski. It detailed his fraud indictments in 2 other states, his use of shell companies, and a pending federal investigation. "This isn't about a child," Miles said. "It's about money and silencing a witness. The feds will flip when they know where he is." Sarah studied the papers, a hard light in her eyes. "This is my life. My son's life. Reduced to evidence." Jacob placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's the weapon that ends the fight. Remember that." They rehearsed. Miles played the part of the husband's lawyer, asking harsh, twisting questions. Jacob sat beside Sarah as her support, a silent, solid presence. Ben was with Walter, learning to fish at the stocked pond, kept busy and away from the stress. A new fear emerged. What if the local judge was swayed by David's smooth lies before they could reveal the truth? Miles had an answer. He had a contact in the FBI field office. He would be in the courtroom, anonymous. If things went sideways, he would intervene. That evening, Sarah packed a small bag for herself and Ben, just in case. The act felt like a betrayal of Jacob's promise, but she had to be practical. Jacob saw the bag and understood. He didn't get angry. Instead, he took her to his safe, a heavy, old thing in his study. He opened it. Inside, beside some documents, was a simple ring. His wife's ring. "I'm not giving this to you," he said quietly. "That wouldn't be right, not now. But I'm showing it to you.
This was my past.
You and Ben are my present and my future. No matter what happens tomorrow, that's true. You have a home here. This is your safety, not a bag by the door." Sarah looked from the ring to his face, and the last of her walls crumbled. She believed him. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and clear. They drove to the county courthouse in Jacob's truck, Miles following in his own vehicle. Ben was left with Walter at the ranch, a tough goodbye. As they walked up the courthouse steps, Sarah's legs felt like water. The courtroom was small and wood-paneled. And there he was, David. He looked handsome, respectable in a tailored suit. He smiled at Sarah, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. His lawyer was a sharp-faced woman from the city. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. Jacob took her elbow, grounding her. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense manner, called the hearing to order. David's lawyer presented her case. A distressed father, an unstable mother who kidnapped the child, a plea for immediate custody and the child's return to his rightful home. She presented affidavits from colleagues questioning Sarah's mental state. Then it was their turn. Sarah's voice was clear as she denied the allegations. Jacob was called to testify. He spoke about her stability, her care for Ben, their life on the ranch. David's lawyer sneered. And you, a lonely rancher, have formed an attachment to this woman, correct? Isn't it true you're emotionally invested in keeping her and the boy there? Jacob met her gaze. I care about them. That's not a crime. Providing shelter isn't a crime. The lawyer pressed, trying to paint him as a desperate man manipulated by Sarah. The judge listened, her face unreadable. Things were leaning David's way. Then Sarah's lawyer stood. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, this entire proceeding is based on a fraud. The petitioner is not who he claims to be. He handed the dossier to the judge and to David's lawyer. His real name is David Kalski. He is a wanted man for federal fraud and conspiracy. This custody battle is a tactic to locate and control a potential witness, my client. The courtroom went silent. David's face drained of color. His lawyer scanned the documents, her confidence cracking. The judge's eyes turned to ice. Is this true, Mr. Miller? David stood, his chair scraping loudly. This is nonsense. These are forgeries. But the panic in his voice was obvious. The judge looked toward the back of the room. Miles's FBI contact stood up, showing his badge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to have a word with Mr. Kalski. Chaos erupted. David tried to bolt for a side door, but a court bailiff stopped him. In the confusion, his cold eyes found Sarah's across the room. The hatred in them was pure and terrifying. This wasn't over. Back at the ranch, there was no celebration. David was in federal custody, but he'd been arraigned and released on bail due to a technicality. He was still out there, and now he was humiliated and angry. Miles confirmed it. He'll be more dangerous. He's lost his legal shield. Now he might try something direct. Jacob increased security. Walter moved into the line cabin. Miles stayed on for a few more days. The ranch felt like a fortress under siege, even though the enemy was unseen. Ben sensed the renewed tension and clung to Jacob even more. That night, a rock crashed through the living room window, shattering glass across the floor. Attached was a crude, typed note. My son. It was a declaration of war. Sarah screamed. Jacob grabbed his rifle and ran outside, but the night was empty and silent. It was just a message. The next day, Sheriff Grady came out. He saw the window, took the note. We'll increase patrols, Jacob. But you know this land better than anyone. He could be hiding out there for days. Jacob knew he was right. They were on their own. The incident changed the dynamic. Fear was back, thick in the air. Sarah and Ben moved back into the main house, all sleeping in the living room near the fireplace for a sense of security. The romantic tension between Jacob and Sarah was now fused with a protective desperation. Their touches were brief, but charged with the unspoken promise of what could be if they survived this. Jacob made a decision. He couldn't just wait. He had to draw the threat away from the house, away from Sarah and Ben. He told Miles his idea. He wants a confrontation. I'll give him one. But on my terms, in a place of my choosing. It was a dangerous gamble. Sarah begged him not to go. He'll kill you, she sobbed. Jacob held her.
No.
He's a city criminal. This is my land. I have the advantage. Jacob's plan was simple. He would make a show of checking on a remote cattle herd in the high north pasture, a box canyon with only one easy way in or out. He would go alone, making himself a target. Miles would be hidden in the rocks above with a rifle and a scope. Walter would stay at the house to protect Sarah and Ben. Sarah helped him prepare, her hands shaking as she filled a thermos with coffee. You come back to me, Jacob Riggs. You promise. It was the first time she'd spoken of a future so directly. He cupped her face. I promise. This ends today. He kissed her then, not a gentle kiss, but a firm, lasting one, sealing his vow. Jacob drove out at dawn. The plan worked almost too well. He hadn't been in the canyon an hour when he saw a figure moving through the scrub pine. It was David. He looked out of place in his expensive boots, a pistol in his hand. Jacob stood in the open, near his truck, unarmed. You think you can take what's mine? David yelled, his voice echoing in the canyon. She and the boy belong to me. Jacob kept his voice calm, loud. They're not property, Kalski. They never were. You lost. The law has you. Walk away. David raised the pistol. I disappear after this. But you won't be around to see it. From the rocks, Miles had a clear shot. But just as he was about to take it, a second man emerged from behind a rock, a rough-looking man David had hired locally. He had a rifle pointed right at Jacob's back. Miles was outnumbered. Jacob saw the second man in his peripheral vision. He was trapped. David smiled, a cruel, victorious smile. Say goodbye, rancher. A voice rang out, clear and strong. Drop the guns. Now. It was Sarah. She stood at the mouth of the canyon, Jacob's hunting rifle in her hands, pointed shakily at David. Walter was beside her, his own shotgun leveled at the second man. She had disobeyed Jacob and followed, unable to let him face this alone. David laughed, turning his pistol toward her. You? You couldn't, he never finished. A shot echoed, but it wasn't from Sarah. It was from Miles, hitting the rifle in the second man's hands, sending it flying. In that split-second distraction, Jacob moved. He lunged at David, tackling him to the hard ground. It was a short, brutal fight. Jacob was stronger, fueled by a lifetime of work and a desperate love. David fought with the viciousness of a cornered rat, but Jacob wrestled the pistol away and pinned him. Walter covered the hired man, who surrendered quickly. Sarah ran to Jacob, the rifle now lowered, tears streaming down her face. Sheriff Grady and the FBI arrived minutes later, sirens breaking the mountain silence. They took David and his hired man into custody, this time on charges of attempted murder, stalking, and violation of his federal bail. As he was led away in handcuffs, David didn't look at Sarah. He stared at Jacob with pure, impotent hatred. Back at the house, in the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline drained away, leaving them all exhausted. Ben rushed to Jacob, hugging him tightly. Sarah just looked at Jacob, her hero, her partner, her love. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, steady certainty. That night, after Ben was asleep, Jacob and Sarah sat on the repaired porch.
He took her hand.
You saved my life today. She shook her head. You saved ours first. On Christmas Eve. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, new ring. Not his wife's, but one he bought in town days ago, hoping for a future. Sarah, I don't have pretty words, but I have this land, this house, and all my love.
Stay.
Build that life with me.
She didn't hesitate.
She said yes. As he slipped the ring on her finger, the first real peace they'd known since Christmas Eve settled over the ranch. The fight was over. The weeks that followed were a study in healing. The federal case against David was solid, and he took a plea deal, facing years in prison. The real threat was gone. The ranch security cameras came down. Life slowly returned to a normal rhythm, but it was a new, brighter normal. Sarah officially took over the ranch's books, becoming a real partner in the business. Ben started at the local small school, making friends. He called Jacob Dad for the first time one morning at breakfast. The word hung in the air, sweet and right. Jacob just nodded, his throat too tight to speak, and ruffled the boy's hair. Jacob and Sarah's romance, no longer overshadowed by danger, bloomed in the sunlight. It was a quiet, mature love. Holding hands on evening walks, planning improvements to the house, sharing simple meals. The slow burn had become a warm, enduring flame. They decided to get married in the spring, a small ceremony right there on the ranch. Sarah wanted to wait, to enjoy the engagement, to just be for a while. Jacob agreed. They had time, a whole lifetime ahead of them on this land they both loved. One afternoon, Jacob found Sarah looking at the old, now repaired living room window. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "The memory?" She turned and smiled, leaning into him.
No.
"It's just a window. It lets the light in. That's all I choose to see now." He held her, knowing she was talking about more than just the glass. Spring arrived, melting the last of the snow. The ranch came alive with green grass and new calves. The wedding was simple. They stood under an old oak tree, Ben holding the rings, Sheriff Grady and Walter as their witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress the color of sunshine. Jacob wore his best shirt. They said their own vows. Sarah promised to be his partner in all things. Jacob promised to always be their shelter, their safe place. When they kissed, Ben whooped with joy, making everyone laugh. It was perfect. That night, in their home, a family now, they sat on the porch again. The same porch where a cold, shivering woman and a boy had stood on Christmas Eve. Ben was inside, asleep, a child finally at peace. Sarah looked at her ring, then at the vast, starlit land that was now hers too. "We have somewhere to go," she said softly, echoing her long-ago whisper. Jacob took her hand. "We're already here." The story that began in desperation on a cold road had found its happy ending on a warm porch under a Texas sky full of promise. The credits could roll here, leaving the audience with a full heart. But the best stories hint that the characters' lives, their love, goes on. And there's wood. The peace after the wedding felt deep and earned. Jacob, Sarah, and Ben settled into a rhythm that was no longer about survival, but about building a life. Ben started calling Jacob Dad. All the time, the word now natural. Sarah's laughter became a constant sound in the house. Yet, Jacob sometimes caught her staring at the horizon, a flicker of the old fear in her eyes. The past was vanquished, but its shadow was long. One afternoon, a familiar truck came up the drive. It was Sheriff Grady, but his face was grim. He brought news. David Kelsky, awaiting transfer to a federal prison, had been involved in a fight. He was in the infirmary, seriously injured. "He's not going anywhere for a long time, if ever," Grady said. "But I thought you should hear it from me." It was an end, but a brutal, ugly one. Sarah felt no joy, only a hollow finality. Life moved on. Sarah found she had a talent for more than books. She started a small project, rescuing and rehabilitating injured barn owls with a local wildlife expert. Ben helped, fascinated. Jacob watched his family thrive on the land he loved, a contentment he'd never known filling him up. He started teaching Ben to ride properly on a gentle pony they bought for his birthday. But a good story knows that peace must be tested. A letter arrived, not for Sarah, but for Jacob. It was from a law firm back east. It concerned the estate of a man named Arthur Riggs, Jacob's father, a man he hadn't seen or spoken to in 30 years. The letter stated simply that Arthur Riggs had passed, and Jacob was named in the will. He needed to appear for the reading. Jacob crumpled the letter. His past was a closed book, a story of a harsh, unloving man and a boy who ran away to become his own man. "I'm not going," he told Sarah. "That money, that life, it's poison. We have everything here." Sarah respected his choice, but she saw the tension it brought back into his shoulders. A week later, a sleek rental car pulled up. A woman in her 40s got out, sharp and professional. She introduced herself as Lydia Chase, the executor of Arthur Riggs's estate. "Your father's instructions were very specific, Mr. Riggs. If you did not come to the reading, I was to bring the reading to you." She was polite but unyielding. The past had come to their door. Lydia Chase sat at their kitchen table, a briefcase of documents beside her. Arthur Riggs, she explained, had built a substantial manufacturing business. He had died alone. "You are his sole heir," Lydia stated. The sum she named was staggering, enough to buy 10 ranches. Ben's eyes went wide. Sarah held her breath. Jacob didn't flinch. "I don't want it. Give it to charity." Lydia nodded as if she'd expected this. "There is a condition. The will is contested by a Mr. Roy Whitlock." Sarah gasped. The name meant nothing to Jacob, but it turned Sarah's blood to ice. Lydia continued, "Mr. Whitlock claims to be your father's biological son, born from a brief affair. He has a paternity test. The court has frozen the assets until the matter is resolved." Jacob's first feeling was relief. A contested will meant more delays, more reason to ignore it. But Sarah's face was ashen. "Roy Whitlock," she whispered. "He's my stepfather." The room went still. The two separate ghosts from their pasts, Jacob's tyrannical father and Sarah's predatory stepfather, had collided in a single, sinister inheritance battle. The pieces snapped together. Roy must have known about Arthur Riggs. He must have been digging into Sarah's whereabouts and discovered who she was with. Finding Jacob was the heir was a bonus, a chance to hurt them both and get a massive payout. This was no coincidence. It was a targeted attack. Lydia, professional to her core, absorbed this. "This complicates things ethically for me. But legally, my duty is to the estate. Mr. Whitlock's claim is serious. If he succeeds, he gains control of a fortune. And, I assume, a powerful means to harass you both indefinitely." Jacob finally understood the trap. Walking away wasn't an option. If Roy won, he'd have the resources and the motivation to make their lives hell forever. Jacob made his decision. "We fight." He looked at Sarah. "We end this for both of us." For the first time, Jacob would have to confront the legacy of the father he hated, to prevent the man who tormented Sarah from winning. The ranch was no longer just a physical sanctuary, it was the stake in a high-stakes legal war. The fight took them to a Houston law office. Jacob hired a tough, smart lawyer named Carla, the same one who had helped before. Roy Whitlock was there, smarmy and confident in a new suit bought with hope of future millions. He smiled at Sarah. "Look at you. Landed on your feet, I see. Found another rich man to hide behind." The preliminary hearing was a brutal affair. Roy's lawyer presented the paternity test linking Roy to Arthur Riggs. It was real. Jacob's father had indeed had another son. Roy's claim was valid. Jacob felt a strange, detached anger. His father's neglect wasn't just for him, The old man had scattered his bitterness far and wide. Jacob's lawyer, Carla, fought back. She argued Roy was unfit, a known manipulator with a criminal-adjacent history, citing the previous stalking charges. The judge, an older man with a tired face, was unmoved. The question of fitness is for a later, separate proceeding regarding the estate's management. Today, we are establishing claim. Mr. Whitlock has established a credible claim. They lost the first round. Roy was recognized as a legal heir. The estate would be split, pending a final review. Roy walked past them, leaning close to Jacob. I always get what's mine. First her mother's insurance, now this. And I'll get the boy, too. A man like me needs an heir. Jacob had to be physically restrained by Carla. Back at the ranch, despair set in. Roy would soon have immense wealth. He could drag them through custody courts for years, bury them in legal fees, send private investigators, make their lives a perpetual battle. Sarah was devastated. We should run. Again. Jacob shook his head.
No.
We planted our flag here. This is our home. We fight on the next front. We prove he's unfit to control a dime. Carla devised a new strategy. Instead of fighting the inheritance, they would weaponize it. They would agree to the split but file for a constructive trust, arguing that due to Roy's history of fraud and coercion, his share should be controlled by a court-appointed administrator to ensure it wasn't used for illegal purposes, like harassing them. To do this, they needed more ammunition. They needed someone from Arthur Riggs's world who could speak to Roy's character, or better yet, to Jacob's father's likely wishes. Lydia Chase, the executor, was neutral. But Jacob remembered one name, Frank Walsh, his father's oldest friend and former business partner. A decent man who'd shown Jacob kindness as a boy. Tracking down Frank was hard. He was retired, living in Maine. Jacob, who hated every memory associated with his father, made the call. To his surprise, Frank was warm. Jake? My God. I heard about your dad. I'm sorry. Jacob cut to the chase, explaining about Roy. Frank's tone turned grave. Arthur was a hard man, but he wouldn't have wanted a snake like that in his business. I'll testify. For you. The final hearing arrived. Frank Walsh testified, painting Arthur Riggs as a flawed man who valued strength and legitimacy. He'd have seen this Whitlock fellow for what he is, a gold digger. And he'd have respected Jake for walking away and building something real. It was powerful. Then, Carla played her masterstroke.
She called Roy to the stand.
Under careful questioning, his smugness evaporated. She pressed him on his past, on his debts, on his sudden interest in his father. Only after the man's death. He grew flustered, then angry. The judge warned him to calm down. Carla saved the best for last. Mr. Whitlock, is it true that while these proceedings were ongoing, you contacted a known associate to discuss using your anticipated inheritance to resolve the ranch problem permanently? Roy paled. That's a lie. Carla presented a phone record, obtained by Miles's contacts, showing the call to a number linked to a shady private investigator with a violent history. It was circumstantial, but it showed intent. The judge had seen enough. He granted the constructive trust. Roy would receive his share, but it would be locked down, doled out for living expense.